Drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from today, because you're about to witness a story that proves why baseball isn't just America's pastime, it's America's teacher. When Cal Ripken Jr. stepped onto that field in Boston on a humid July evening, nobody could have predicted how a chorus of boos would transform into a moment that would be remembered for generations. The sun was setting over Fenway Park, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured grass that had witnessed countless baseball legends make history. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the kind of tension that only a crucial late-season game between bitter rivals could generate. The Baltimore Orioles were in town, and with them came their Iron Man shortstop, Cal Ripken Jr., quietly carrying a consecutive game streak that had become the talk of baseball. In the stands behind home plate, Thaddeus "Thunder" Blackstone held court among his devoted followers. Known throughout the league as the most vocal and intimidating fan leader in baseball, Blackstone had spent decades perfecting the art of getting under opposing players' skin. His trademark thunderous voice could silence entire sections of the stadium, and tonight, he had his sights set on making history of his own. The evening had started normally enough. Maverick, the Voice, Hawthorne, Fenway's legendary announcer, had introduced the lineups with his usual flair, his rich baritone echoing through the stadium's ancient speakers. But there was something different in the air, a current of anticipation that even the most casual fan could feel. Storm, the lens, Wolf, covering the game for Sports Illustrated, would later say he'd never seen the old park so charged with energy before the first pitch was even thrown. In the visitors' dugout, Cal Ripken Jr. went through his pre-game routine with characteristic focus, seemingly oblivious to the growing hostility in the stands. His streak of consecutive games played had become more than just a number. It was a testament to dedication, perseverance, and the pure love of the game. But tonight, that streak would face a test that nobody saw coming. Zephyr, the Viper, Steele, Boston's controversial star pitcher, had been quoted in the morning papers making dismissive comments about Ripken's streak. "Some people play for records," he told Axel the Quill Frost, "others play for wins." The comment had sparked outrage in Baltimore, but Ripken, true to form, hadn't responded. His silence only seemed to fuel the fire of anticipation. As the teams took the field for warm-ups, 12-year-old Phoenix, Nix, Rivera sat with her grandfather Atlas in the stands along the third baseline. They had driven 6 hours to be here, not because they were Boston fans, but because Atlas had wanted his granddaughter to see something special. "Baseball isn't just about winning and losing," he told her on the drive up. "It's about character, about how you handle yourself when everyone's watching." Coach Rafferty Sterling, Boston's veteran manager, watched from the home dugout as his team went through their pre-game routines. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but those who knew him well could see he was troubled by the growing hostility in the stands. Sterling had been in baseball long enough to know when a powder keg was about to explode. The first signs of trouble came during batting practice. Thaddeus Blackstone had orchestrated a coordinated effort among his followers, timing their boos to coincide with each of Ripken's practice swings. The sound was deafening, a wall of negativity that would have rattled most players. But Ripken continued his routine, each movement deliberate and focused, as if the noise was nothing more than a summer breeze. Knox, the Law Thorne, tonight's home plate umpire and one of the most respected officials in the game, had seen plenty of hostile crowds in his 30 years behind the plate. But something about tonight felt different. The animosity wasn't just coming from a few vocal fans, it seemed to be spreading through the stadium like a virus. As game time approached, Storm Wolf's camera captured a moment that would later become iconic. Ripken, walking back to the dugout after warm-ups, stopped to sign a baseball for a young fan wearing a Boston cap. The simple act of kindness stood in stark contrast to the jeers and boos raining down from the stands. The photo would later win multiple awards, but its true significance wouldn't be understood until the events of the ninth inning unfolded. The tension escalated when Zephyr Steele approached Ripken during the pre-game stretches. Their conversation couldn't be heard over the crowd noise, but body language told the story. Steele's smirk and dismissive gesture were met with Ripken's characteristic calm, a slight nod, nothing more. The exchange lasted only moments, but it set the tone for what was to come. In the press box, Axel Frost furiously typed notes into his laptop. "The atmosphere at Fenway tonight isn't just electric, it's combustible," he would write in his column the next day. "Something's going to give, and when it does, baseball history might never be the same." Phoenix Rivera tugged at her grandfather's sleeve as the teams lined up for the national anthem. "Why are they being so mean to him?" she asked. Atlas smiled sadly, years of baseball wisdom in his eyes. "Sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness," he answered. "But watch carefully tonight. You might just learn what real strength looks like." As the first pitch approached, Maverick Hawthorne's voice carried a subtle warning in its usual warmth as he reminded fans about sportsmanship and respect for the game. But his words were nearly drowned out by the coordinated boos led by Blackstone's group. The sound rolled through the stadium like thunder, growing louder with each passing moment. Ripken took his position at shortstop for the top of the first inning, his movements precise and economical as always. 2 decades of professional baseball had taught him that the game didn't care about noise, about opinions, about anything except what happened between the lines. But even veterans in the press box were wondering how anyone could maintain focus under such sustained hostility. What nobody knew then was that this was just the beginning. The real story wouldn't start until the 9th inning, when a single moment would silence the boos, humble the critics, and remind everyone why baseball has always been more than just a game. But before that moment could arrive, the tension would have to build, the drama would have to escalate, and Cal Ripken Jr. would have to show everyone in Fenway Park what it really means to be a legend. As the umpires gathered at home plate for the exchange of lineup cards, Knox Thorne caught Ripken's eye and gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. In his 30 years behind the plate, he'd seen plenty of players earn their place in baseball history. But something told him that tonight he was about to witness something different, something that would remind everyone why they fell in love with this game in the first place. The sun had fully set now, and the stadium lights cast their bright glow over the field. In the dugout, Cal Ripken Jr. quietly adjusted his glove, his face showing no sign of the storm raging around him. The game was about to begin, but the real story, the one that would be told and retold for generations, was still hours away. Stay tuned for what happens next, and don't forget to share your own memories of baseball's greatest moments in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a player prove their critics wrong in spectacular fashion? Let us know your story, and remember, sometimes the loudest statement is made in perfect silence. As the game moved into its early innings, what had started as typical rivalry hostility was transforming into something darker. The coordinated jeering orchestrated by Thaddeus "Thunder" Blackstone had taken on a life of its own, spreading through Fenway Park like wildfire. But nobody could have predicted how the events unfolding would lead to one of baseball's most unforgettable moments. From his position at shortstop, Cal Ripken Jr. remained focused on the game with his trademark intensity. Each movement was precise, each defensive alignment carefully considered, as if the cascade of boos was nothing more than background noise. Storm, the lens, Wolf's camera captured a telling moment, Ripken quietly repositioning a rookie outfielder, teaching even as the crowd's hostility reached new heights. Zephyr, the Viper, Steele was dealing on the mound, his pitches painting the corners with cruel precision. But between innings, his theatrical gestures toward Ripken told a story of personal animosity that went beyond the usual rivalry. The Boston ace seemed determined to prove his earlier comments about Ripken's streak, each strikeout accompanied by a pointed glare toward shortstop. In the press box, Axel, the Quill, Frost noticed something that most observers had missed. Despite the hostile atmosphere, Ripken had subtly adjusted his pre-pitch routine, taking extra time to acknowledge young fans between plays. It wasn't showmanship, it was a veteran player demonstrating that grace under pressure isn't just about what happens on the field. Phoenix Rivera, watching intently from her seat along the third base line, tugged at her grandfather's sleeve during a particularly vicious round of booing. "But he's not doing anything wrong," she protested. Atlas Rivera smiled knowingly, his eyes never leaving the field. "Sometimes," he explained, "the true measure of a person isn't in how they handle praise, but in how they handle unfair criticism." By the 4th inning, the game had settled into a tense pitcher's duel, but the real drama was unfolding in the stands. Blackstone had organized his followers into sections, timing their jeers to coincide with every move Ripken made. The coordination was impressive, but there was an ugliness to it that made even some Boston diehards uncomfortable. Coach Rafferty Sterling watched from the home dugout with growing concern. He'd seen plenty of hostile crowds in his decades in baseball, but this felt different. The personal nature of the attacks, the relentlessness of the booing, it was crossing a line that baseball's unwritten rules usually protected. Maverick, the voice, Hawthorne tried to maintain his professional tone, but even his legendary announcing voice carried an edge of disapproval as he called the game. Between innings, his carefully worded reminders about sportsmanship became more pointed, though they seemed to fall on deaf ears. Knox, the Law Thorne, the veteran umpire behind the plate, had seen enough by the fifth inning. During a pitching change, he approached Blackstone's section and issued a quiet warning. The gesture didn't silence the boos, but it sent a clear message: there were limits, even in baseball's most heated rivalries. The tension ratcheted up further when Ripken came to bat in the sixth inning. Steele's first pitch sailed dangerously close to his head, prompting an immediate warning from Thorne. The Boston pitcher's innocent shrug couldn't mask the intent, but Ripken's response was simply to dig back in, his face revealing nothing. Storm Wolf's camera caught the subtle exchange that followed, Ripken calmly calling time, stepping out to clean his spikes, giving both himself and Steele a moment to cool down. It wasn't dramatic, but it was leadership in its purest form, the kind that young players watch and learn from. In the seventh inning stretch, Atlas Rivera shared a story with his granddaughter about seeing Ripken play in his rookie year. Even then, he recalled, you could see something special. Not just in how he played, but in how he carried himself. Phoenix listened intently, beginning to understand that she was watching more than just a baseball game. The game remained close, each pitch carrying the weight of a crucial late-season matchup between rivals. But the real story was in the subtext, in how a future Hall of Famer was handling sustained hostility with a dignity that was beginning to make some of his critics uncomfortable. Axel Frost noticed a subtle shift in the crowd's energy as the game progressed. While Blackstone's core group maintained their verbal assault, others in the stadium had grown quieter, some even showing signs of embarrassment at the continued harassment. The veteran reporter had seen enough baseball to know when a turning point was approaching. By the eighth inning, even Zephyr Steele seemed affected by the relentless negativity. His theatrical gestures had diminished, replaced by a focused intensity that suggested he was beginning to understand that this game had become about something more than just baseball. In the top of the eighth, Ripken made a spectacular play deep in the hole, ranging far to his right to rob a Boston player of a hit. The play was vintage Ripken, fundamentally perfect, professionally executed, without any unnecessary flourish. For a brief moment, baseball instincts overcame rivalry, and scattered applause broke through the boos. That moment of appreciation seemed to enrage Blackstone, who immediately led his followers in their loudest chorus of jeers yet. But something had changed. The cheers, though quickly drowned out, had revealed a crack in the wall of hostility. Even some Boston players were shaking their heads at the continued abuse of a player who was simply doing his job with professional excellence. Coach Sterling had seen enough. During the eighth inning pitching change, he took a moment to speak quietly with his players in the dugout. No one could hear what was said, but the message was clear in how his team carried themselves afterward. There was respect for the game that went beyond rivalry. As the game entered the ninth inning, the tension had reached a fever pitch. The score remained close, but the real drama wasn't in the numbers on the scoreboard. It was in the growing sense that something had to give, that this sustained demonstration of negativity would either break the target of its fury or reveal something profound about character and resilience. Storm Wolf's camera captured a poignant moment between innings, Ripken quietly picking up a piece of trash near his position, maintaining the field as he had done thousands of times before. The simple act of stewardship, performed under a barrage of boos, spoke volumes about his respect for the game. In the press box, Axel Frost was already crafting the opening lines of what would become an award-winning column. Baseball, he would write, has always been a game of inches and moments. But sometimes, its greatest lessons have nothing to do with what happens on the scoreboard. Young Phoenix Rivera had stopped asking her grandfather questions, her eyes fixed on Ripken's every move. She was learning something that no textbook could teach, about dignity, about professionalism, about handling adversity with grace. Atlas watched both the game and his granddaughter, knowing that tonight's lesson would stay with her forever. As the teams prepared for the final inning, nobody in Fenway Park could have predicted what was about to unfold. The stage had been set by 8 innings of sustained hostility, but baseball has a way of writing endings that no one expects. The 9th inning would not only silence the boos but would remind everyone present why baseball has always been more than just a game. Knox Thorne adjusted his mask behind home plate, preparing for the final frame. In his 30 years of umpiring, he had developed an instinct for baseball's biggest moments. Something told him that despite all the ugliness that had preceded it, this 9th inning would become part of baseball folklore. Stay tuned for what happens next in this incredible story of resilience and redemption. And don't forget to share your memories of baseball's most dramatic 9th innings in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment when the game transcended rivalry and reminded everyone why baseball is called America's pastime? Let us know, and remember, sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured on the scoreboard. The 9th inning began with a tension that seemed to physically press down on Fenway Park. The Baltimore Orioles trailed by a single run, and as Cal Ripken Jr. stepped into the on-deck circle, even Thaddeus "Thunder" Blackstone's coordinated jeering couldn't mask the electricity in the air. Something was about to happen, everyone could feel it. Zephyr, the Viper, Steele remained on the mound, his pitch count high but his determination higher. He had thrown a masterful game, but the look in his eyes as he watched Ripken warm up suggested he wanted more than just a win. He wanted to be the one to humiliate the legend, to prove his earlier comments about Ripken's streak being about records rather than winning. Storm, the lens, Wolf positioned himself near the Orioles' dugout, his experienced photographer's instinct telling him that history was about to unfold. Through his viewfinder, he caught the subtle details others might miss, the way Ripken methodically adjusted his batting gloves, the quiet confidence in his stance, the complete focus that had characterized his entire career. In the stands, Phoenix Rivera clutched her grandfather's arm. Atlas had taught her enough about baseball to understand the significance of this moment. "Watch carefully," he whispered, not taking his eyes off the field. "Sometimes the game shows us what we're really made of." The leadoff batter worked a walk, bringing a surge of energy through the Baltimore dugout. As Ripken emerged from the on-deck circle, Blackstone unleashed his loudest coordinated attack yet. The sound was deafening, years of rivalry and resentment concentrated into a wall of hostile noise. Maverick, the voice, Hawthorne's announcement of Ripken's at-bat was nearly lost in the cacophony, but those who could hear it detected a note of anticipation in his veteran broadcaster's voice. He had seen enough baseball to know when a moment was approaching that would be remembered for generations. Coach Rafferty Sterling shifted uncomfortably in the Boston dugout. He had tried to maintain professional distance from the crowd's behavior, but something about this moment felt wrong. Baseball was supposed to be better than this, even in its fiercest rivalries. Knox, the law, Thorne called time briefly to sweep off home plate, using the moment to make eye contact with both Ripken and Steele. In that glance was 30 years of baseball wisdom and a clear message: play the game right, respect its boundaries, honor its traditions. The first pitch from Steele was a fastball high and inside, too close to be unintentional. The crowd roared its approval, but there was an undercurrent of discomfort among the true baseball fans in attendance. This wasn't competition anymore. It was something uglier. Ripken's response was characteristic of his entire career. He calmly stepped out, adjusted his batting gloves, and dug back in. No glare at the pitcher, no complaint to the umpire, no visible reaction to the continuing chorus of boos. Just the focused preparation that had marked all 2,131 consecutive games of his streak. From the press box, Axel, the Quill, Frost watched the at-bat unfold with growing anticipation. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, ready to record what his instincts told him would be a defining moment in baseball history. "The air feels like October," he would later write, "but the drama exceeds any postseason game I've ever witnessed." The second pitch was a breaking ball in the dirt, met with scattered laughter from Blackstone's section. But Ripken hadn't built his Hall of Fame career by chasing bad pitches. He remained perfectly still, his discipline as impressive as his power. Young Phoenix Rivera, who had been asking questions all night, fell silent. She was beginning to understand something profound about grace under pressure, about maintaining dignity when others tried to strip it away. Her grandfather nodded approvingly, seeing the lesson sink in. The count reached 2-1, and the tension in Fenway Park reached a fever pitch. Steele's next pitch was his signature slider, the one that had frustrated hitters all season. Ripken started his swing, then held it back at the last possible moment, a veteran's recognition that had come from thousands of at-bats. Storm Wolf's camera captured the subtle shift in Steele's expression. The Boston ace was beginning to realize that despite the hostile environment, despite the personal animosity, he was facing a player who remained completely focused on the fundamental challenge: bat against ball, striker against defender, a contest as old as the game itself. The 3-1 pitch brought the moment everyone had been waiting for, though not in the way anyone expected. Steele's fastball ran inside again, this time clearly intentional, clearly dangerous. The crowd's roar of approval died in their throats as they watched Ripken's response. There was no charge to the mound, no angry gesture, no breaking of his professional demeanor. Instead, Ripken calmly picked himself up, dusted off his uniform, and retook his stance. The contrast between the provocation and the response was so stark that even Blackstone's followers fell quiet for a moment. Knox Thorne removed his mask and issued an immediate warning to both benches, his voice carrying the authority of decades behind the plate. But it was Ripken's composure that truly controlled the moment. His dignity in the face of both physical and verbal abuse began to transform the atmosphere in Fenway Park. Coach Sterling emerged from the Boston dugout, not to argue the warning but to have a word with his pitcher. The conversation was brief, but its message was clear. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed, even in the heat of a pennant race. The next pitch would be remembered not just for what happened, but for how it changed everything that had come before it. Steele, perhaps affected by the warning or his coach's words, left a fastball over the heart of the plate. What followed would become one of baseball's most iconic moments. The crack of the bat echoed through the suddenly hushed stadium. The ball's trajectory was never in doubt, a majestic arc toward the green monster in left field. But it wasn't just a home run. It was a statement about baseball's capacity to transcend hatred, about professionalism triumphing over provocation. As Ripken rounded the bases, something remarkable happened. The boos that had filled Fenway Park all night began to fade, replaced first by scattered applause, then by growing cheers. Baseball fans, even those who had participated in Blackstone's coordinated jeering, couldn't help but recognize the pure poetry of the moment. Storm Wolf's camera caught it all: the perfect swing, the ball's graceful arc, the gradual transformation of the crowd's response. But his most powerful shot was of Ripken's face as he rounded the bases. No triumphant gesture, no provocative celebration, just the same professional focus he had maintained all night. In the stands, Phoenix Rivera jumped to her feet, caught up in the moment's magic. Her grandfather stood more slowly, but with tears in his eyes. "That," he said quietly, "is how you answer critics. Not with words, but with excellence." Even Thaddeus Blackstone stood silent, his carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment rendered meaningless by a single swing that embodied everything great about baseball. The game had spoken, as it so often does, with a clarity that no amount of artificial noise could diminish. But the night's drama wasn't over. As Ripken touched home plate, something even more extraordinary began to unfold, a moment that would remind everyone present why baseball has always been more than just a game. Stay tuned for the conclusion of this incredible story, and don't forget to share your memories of baseball's most powerful moments of redemption in the comments below. When have you seen someone answer hatred with excellence? Let us know, and remember, sometimes the most eloquent response to criticism is simply doing what you do best. What happened next at Fenway Park would become more than just another baseball moment. It would become a testament to how quickly hatred can transform into respect when confronted with pure excellence. As Cal Ripken Jr. touched home plate, something extraordinary began to unfold in the historic stadium. It started with a single fan in Thaddeus "Thunder" Blackstone's own section. An elderly man in a faded Red Sox cap slowly rose to his feet and began to applaud. The gesture seemed to break a spell, and suddenly others joined him. The applause spread through Fenway Park like a wave, section by section, until even the most ardent critics found themselves swept up in the moment. Zephyr, the Viper, Steele stood on the mound, his usual bravado replaced by a look of quiet revelation. The Boston ace, who had spent the night trying to prove Ripken's streak was about records rather than winning, had just witnessed something that transcended both, a lesson in professionalism that no amount of practice could teach. Storm, the voice Wolf's camera captured the transformation in stunning detail. His lens caught the moment Blackstone himself, the architect of the night's hostility, slowly lowered his hands from their conducting position. The famous rabble-rouser's face showed something unexpected: respect, perhaps even a touch of shame. In the press box, Axel, the quill, Frost's fingers flew across his keyboard, trying to capture the magnitude of what was unfolding. Sometimes, he would write, baseball reminds us that its greatest moments aren't about winning or losing, but about the character revealed in how we play the game. Young Phoenix Rivera stood on her seat, clapping with all her might, tears streaming down her face though she couldn't quite explain why. Her grandfather Atlas held her steady, his own eyes glistening. "This," he said softly, "this is why we love baseball. Not for the hits or the wins, but for moments like this that teach us who we can be." The standing ovation continued, growing louder rather than diminishing. Coach Rafferty Sterling emerged from the Boston dugout and stood, hat over heart, acknowledging not just a great baseball play but a lesson in dignity that had humbled everyone present. His players followed suit, standing at the dugout rail in silent respect. Knox, the Law Thorne, who had seen everything in his 30 years behind the plate, later said he had never heard anything quite like it. The sound wasn't just applause, it was thousands of people acknowledging that they had witnessed something profound about human nature and the power of responding to hatred with excellence. Maverick, the voice, Hawthorne's voice cracked with emotion as he described the scene for radio listeners. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what we're witnessing tonight goes beyond baseball. This is about character, about dignity, about the kind of respect that can only be earned, never demanded." As the ovation entered its 5th minute, something remarkable happened near the Boston dugout. Zephyr Steele, the man who had tried to intimidate and provoke Ripken all night, walked slowly toward the Orioles' dugout. The stadium grew quiet, watching this unexpected development. What followed would be captured perfectly by Storm Wolf's camera, Steele extending his hand to Ripken, who met him halfway. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The handshake spoke volumes about respect earned and lessons learned, about baseball's unique ability to transform rivalry into brotherhood. The moment sparked another wave of applause, even louder than before. Thaddeus Blackstone, the man who had orchestrated the night's harassment, found himself doing something he had never done in all his years of attending games, applauding an opposing player. The action seemed to surprise even him. From her perch on the third base side, Phoenix Rivera watched in awe as players from both teams emerged from their dugouts to acknowledge Ripken. Her grandfather squeezed her shoulder gently. "Remember this," he said. "Remember that true greatness isn't about how you handle praise, it's about how you handle criticism." The game would resume eventually, but something had fundamentally changed in Fenway Park. The hostile atmosphere that had characterized the earlier innings had been transformed into something almost reverent. Even the most routine plays were now watched with a new appreciation for the professionalism they represented. In the Boston dugout, Coach Sterling gathered his younger players. "Watch and learn," he told them quietly. "This is how you build a legacy. Not with words, not with gestures, but with consistent excellence and unshakable dignity." The Orioles would go on to win the game, but the final score seemed almost irrelevant compared to what had transpired. As the teams left the field, fans remained standing, understanding that they had witnessed something rare, a moment when sport transcended competition to teach a lesson about human character. Axel Frost's column the next day would capture the essence of what had occurred. Last night, Cal Ripken Jr. didn't just silence his critics, he educated them. He showed everyone present that the true measure of a person isn't found in how they handle success, but in how they handle hostility. In doing so, he transformed a night of intended harassment into a masterclass in professional dignity. The impact of that night would ripple through baseball for years to come. Thaddeus Blackstone, the once proud orchestrator of opposing team harassment, would later be seen taking a gentler approach to his role as fan leader. When asked about the change, he would simply say, "Sometimes you need to be taught what real strength looks like." Storm Wolf's photographs of the evening, particularly the handshake between Ripken and Steele, would win multiple awards. But more importantly, they would become teaching tools in clubhouses across the country, showing young players that the game's greatest moments often have nothing to do with the scoreboard. Phoenix Rivera would keep her ticket stub from that game, framed alongside a photo taken by her grandfather of the standing ovation. Years later, as a college baseball player herself, she would often share the story of that night with teammates, explaining how it taught her that true victory sometimes means winning people over rather than beating them down. The incident would even change Zephyr Steele. The Boston ace, once known for his confrontational style, began showing a different side to his game. "That night taught me something," he would later tell reporters. "It showed me that the strongest statement you can make isn't with your words or even your fastball, it's with your character." Knox Thorne would go on to use that game as an example when mentoring young umpires. "Sometimes," he would tell them, "your job isn't just to call balls and strikes. Sometimes it's to be present for moments that remind everyone why this game is special." Cal Ripken Jr.'s consecutive game streak would eventually end at 2,632 games, but the lesson he taught that night at Fenway Park continues to resonate. It wasn't just about showing up every day, it was about showing up with dignity, with professionalism, with an unwavering commitment to playing the game the right way. The story of that night has become part of baseball folklore, not because of the home run or even the streak, but because it demonstrated something timeless about sport and human nature. It showed that excellence, consistently displayed with dignity, has the power to transform hatred into respect, criticism into admiration. As the years passed, those who were present that night would often be asked about what they witnessed. Their answers would vary in detail but agree on the essential truth: they had seen something more than a baseball game. They had seen a demonstration of how to handle adversity with grace, how to answer criticism with excellence, and how to transform enemies into admirers through unwavering professionalism. Share this video if you believe in the power of answering hostility with excellence, and let us know in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment when sport transcended competition to teach a larger lesson about life? Remember, sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured on the scoreboard but in the hearts and minds we change along the way.